Thank you for the introduction. The students that I've met with, the faculty that I've met with, this is my first time in Utah, and it's been a really exciting experience, really stimulating conversations, really welcoming and really warm. I'm not just saying that to get you guys to clap afterwards. That's genuine. And so I want to thank you for your hospitality and the invitation and my experiences so far in being here. So with that said, I was asked to give kind of an informal discussion on something of interest. And so I decided to talk about impact. And the reason why I decided to talk about impact is because I was not convinced as I was going through graduate school, postdoc training, that I actually wanted to be a professor. And yet, I am a professor at University of Michigan. And so people often ask me why. Why did I decide to be a professor? And so I do have to think long and hard about that because I was not convinced as a graduate student. The women seemed like their marriages were falling apart. The kids seemed like they were pretty crazy, like they weren't going to the spa and taking care of themselves. It wasn't actually a lifestyle that I said that I wanted for myself. There wasn't examples of what I wanted to do or what I wanted to be. I didn't see representation of myself in a lot of places that I was also working, and so it wasn't attractive to me. And so in thinking about being a professor now, part of it has to do with the way I think about impact. And so I am challenging us in this conversation that we're going to have today. It is a conversation, so I do want us to interact to some extent, and thinking about the way we define impact. And so that's my first question to you guys. When you think about professors and you think about the impact that we are having in the academy, what comes to mind? What types of impact are we having? That is not rhetorical. Yeah.
I guess one encouragement that comes to my mind is helping to forge the new generation of scientists.
Okay, so thinking about from a training aspect, preparing this kind of next generation of scientists. Anything else we think about with impact? Yeah.
Training undergraduates who won't necessarily go into the sciences or ecology specifically.
Okay, so thinking about the broader community of citizens, perhaps, or global citizens that we are engaging with, and what type of mark we are instilling and principles we're instilling in the broader community. Any other thing? Yeah?
I'm going to say H factor.
H factor, oh, that good old H index. Okay, good. So thinking about the uptake, perhaps, of our science, and one metric that we use has to do with citations. So that's another dimension of impact. My view on impact is quite broad. And so as I was deciding what type of professor I wanted to be, I thought long and hard about what is my brand, what is my profile of a professor, given that I didn't exactly see examples of things in other professors that I was super jazzed about. There were pieces, but holistically, as a total package, I didn't relate. It didn't resonate with me. So I decided to think about, well, what type of profile do I want to create as a professor? And so the slides in the presentation that I'm going to go through today is going to give you a little bit of background in terms of my thinking and my approaches. And that's not to say that I am promoting, frankly. But it's not to say that your approach has to be my approach, right? That's not what I'm trying to do. But what I am trying to do is broaden your perspective on how we think about impact. And so based on your own identity, based on your own skill set, based on your own communities, based on your own passions, you can integrate that into the way that you are working. And so whatever that looks like, I am challenging us to think more broadly about what those metrics and what that definition is. So to begin, it took me 3 years to decide on the name of my lab. I didn't like the idea of the Harris lab. I was like, yeah, no. Me and my dad, not that cool anyway. We're not about to name a lab after you. So instead, I wanted to focus on impact and focus on the type of work that I was doing. And so I ended up brainstorming with my lab. I ended up partnering with an undergrad, actually, who was a design and a biology major. And so we thought about science communication. And so I thought, again, about my brand, right? What is my impact? How am I representing myself as a scholar, but how am I representing my research program? And so ultimately came up with all, not A-L-L, all as in the wonder of nature. So the Applied Wildlife Ecology Lab. Part of my passion and what I do has to do with this love for nature. I grew up in Philadelphia as a city girl, and so it's kind of ironic. I think some people think of, like, how did I end up being a wildlife biologist? But it does have to do with the connection to nature. I went to Africa for the first time when I was 13 as a part of a program with the Philadelphia Zoo. That was my transformative experience. And so I knew that in defining the type of impact that I wanted to have, I want to facilitate exposure. I want to facilitate appreciation. I want to facilitate a curiosity and a wonder for our natural system. And so hence the name all being a part of defining my impact and my identity in the academic space. All right, so we know that we're living in the Anthropocene. We know that we are living in a world that is constantly changing and the human footprint is growing. And so I'm highlighting this because it means that our relevance as ecologists is going to be based on the way that we are not only communicating, but also the way that we are disseminating our science, the communities that we're reaching, and who's engaging. So it means that we can't just be insular. It means we can't just be talking to ourselves. We do have to think about broader audiences. And that has to do with thinking about our impact. And so here we go, our wonderful impact factor. This is our traditional way of thinking about the impact of our science. And there's lots of wonderful premier journals that we're all aspiring to get into in order for us to get our wonderful citations and defining our impact. But the reality is that, unfortunately, citations are political. Unfortunately, we like to cite our friends. Unfortunately, there are biases with gender. There are geographic biases. A number of biases are implicit in just thinking about citations, which forces us to think about how much quality, how much weight we are putting on them. And so I've battled for a while in thinking about this whole impact factor and citation metrics, et cetera, and really settled on the fact that I want my work to be used. And so some people can be satisfied with use being a citation. That's your business. That's your issue. You want to do that? Fair enough. I want my work to be used, and which means I want my work to be integrated into conservation and decision making, which means personally I would value WWF citing my work in a management plan more so than I would value a citation in another journal. That's my personal perspective. I think that as we are defining impact, we can use an analogy. And we can use an analogy thinking about conservation biology and thinking about community ecology. So one thing we can think about is that when a species goes extinct, we not only lose that species, but we also lose the function of that species within its community. And so we can think about the loss of the species, so thinking about just species richness, right, decline in biodiversity. We can also think about a decline in functional diversity. And so all these examples up here of extinct species represent very unique contributions to ecological communities based on their natural history and based on the function that they are playing within their community. If we take this in a broader context and think about a community and think about a network, for example, with all of our nodes representing individuals, and we can think about the connections that we have, we can also think about redundancy, right? So we can think about in communities, we can estimate redundancy, thinking about some of the functional traits. We can also put different weights on species based on their uniqueness, based on the uniqueness of their attributes. And so this stuck with me because I was like, I'm unique. I have some unique attributes. I don't want to be redundant. Good. So what is my profile going to be as an academician? And am I going to represent something that is redundant, something that is already existing, and that my removal doesn't do anything? My removal, I don't mean death. I just mean like I'm not in the academy anymore. Doesn't matter, right? So that's a part of me defining my impact based on thinking about what my unique contributions are in the spaces that I'm working. And am I representing something that is unique? So one way we can think about impact has to do with the species, perhaps, that we're working on. And so I chose to work on carnivores, not just because they're cool and awesome and super charismatic, but because of their ecological role, but because of the function that they play. Because we know the loss of carnivores has cascading negative implications for a number of communities. And so that is a part of defining their impact. They also include a number of species of conservation concern. So that's another justification in me saying that, well, if I want to do research that could lead to conservation or management decisions, I need to be working on species that people are actually making conservation and management decisions about. Where we work also helps to define our impact. This is an example that's showing the number of research articles that are focused on conservation, ecology, or biogeography. And we can look at kind of the geographic distribution. This was just from 1 year where they aggregated the studies, focused on all those topic areas. And we certainly see that there's geographic biases. We certainly see that there are major areas around the world that are being understudied. And so what are we missing? And so in thinking about our impact, what we work on, where we work is a part of defining that. So I just chose to work in West Africa for a lot of my research program. And so that is significant for a number of reasons, given the dearth of ecological research that's happening in that region of the world and the lack of capacity that's built around ecological monitoring and conservation decisions. So I made an explicit choice to work in a region of the world that is super difficult. And I don't speak French, yet I work in Francophone countries. So I do a lot of animation to get through. But who we're working with. There was a study that was published a little while ago where there was a evaluation of the impact, and so this is going back to our traditional metrics of impact, and a metric of openness. And so that had to do with thinking about how much collaboration and how much open access around data sets, around the collaborative teams that are formed. And there's a couple things that I want you to take note of when we look at this impact. And so we're highlighting kind of the countries that are at the top end of that spectrum. We have a big impact of a big representation of knowledge production in the US. And so we're all like super proud of this big old circle associated with the US. But let's not forget this other axis here. So then we have this metric of openness. And so we're falling on an end that's not so positive in terms of what does collaboration and openness around data look like. Versus other countries, Sweden, Switzerland, Singapore, their number of production in terms of number of papers are much smaller, and yet their impact is seemingly equivalent or even slightly higher. And they're arguably doing this or having this impact because of how their teams and how their science is actually done. So the approach that they're using to doing their scholarship and it being a more collaborative framework. And so I'm highlighting this to challenge us to think about not only what species we're working on, where we're working, but who are we working with? More evidence highlighting that the best research is produced when scientists are not just in their like wonderful ivory towers and like isolated bubbles, that we're actually talking to people, we're talking to practitioners, we're talking to the audience that we want to actually use the information that we're generating, and that knowledge and research is co-produced. And so there's a discussion that happens on what type of science should be done. What type of research should we do? This is my skill set. What are your needs? How do we bring those two dimensions together in order to do research that can lead to impact and that has utility, again, for conservation management decisions, et cetera. So this co-production of working with communities or stakeholders are arguably contributing to how we think about impact. So I made a decision, and it was not a decision that is necessarily well supported, in that if I am a professor, then I should be facilitating opportunities and training. And so I decided that every paper that I publish will include student co-authors on the work that we're doing. And that may not seem like a big deal, and that may seem like, sure, like that's super easy to do. But it's actually not. And it actually slows down the process of production because you are teaching, you are training through the step. And so this is an example of a paper that I was involved in working in West Africa in Ghana, and it involved a PhD student at Berkeley, and it involved a research technician that was from Ghana in the country that we are working in. And so I feel very passionate about when I'm working in countries that are not my own, what does collaboration look like and what does opportunity look like? I refuse to be a colonial scientist, so I am not going into places, taking information out and producing amazing papers in science. That's not what I'm doing. I'm also not going into places and saying, I'm going to pay this technician $2 a day and feel all good about myself because I hired and created some type of economic opportunity. And then that's the end of involvement. That's also not my perspective on what does capacity and what does collaboration look like. And so again, I am co-creating research. I'm deciding what research gets done based on consultation. I'm doing research that the community or the agencies or the government can use and can benefit from, and I am facilitating opportunities for education, training, and capacity building. And so publications is one metric of me showing what does collaboration actually look like. Tal mentioned this paper that recently came out in Conservation Biology that I was really proud of, and really proud because it is an explicit demonstration of this commitment around collaboration, co-production, and broadening participation and effort. So if we were to look at the co-authors that are here, I'm just going to spend 2 seconds highlighting, there's a graduate student from my lab that's on the paper. There's an undergraduate student from my lab, Jenna, that's also on the paper. And then our international partners. So we have an ecological officer from Niger that worked in the parks that we were working in. We have a forester from Burkina Faso that's also involved in the research. We have a graduate student that's being sponsored by the project that's now in Senegal. And then we have a University of Burkina Faso professor. And we have the Director General for Hunting Concessions from Burkina Faso, Benoit, also on the paper. So when I say collaboration, when I say co-production, this is a demonstration of me saying, I am true to those words. I am true to this commitment on what my science looks like and what my approach to my scholarship is. But this makes the process longer. It makes the process more time consuming. There are trade-offs in making this decision. So I'm not at all trying to paint a very flowery picture because this is hard. And the reality is that it's counted as one paper, right? It's just one paper, like simmer down. It's just one. But the input to the paper is not the same as other people's input to produce their one. Right, and so I'm arguing that we focus a lot on the output, right? We focus a lot on those numbers of grants or numbers of papers, and we ignore the front end. We ignore what it took to actually make that science happen. We ignore what it took to actually get people from conflicting countries together to work on research. We ignore the input, and I would argue that that needs to be highlighted more. Going back to the idea of thinking about interdisciplinary research, if you will, The student that I mentioned earlier that is a biology and a design major, she was very torn in her academic kind of pathway. There was two passions, and she felt throughout her undergraduate career that she had to like pick a team. And that was her experience the entire time until she came to my lab as a senior and saying, I really like design and I really like biology. I am frustrated. I don't know how to bring these two parts of myself together. And so I'm highlighting this to emphasize that part of the way that I am defining impact does include the way I'm interacting and training students, but also my approach to disseminating the science and the research that we do. So I tasked her with creating infographics for the lab, creating logos for different projects. Ultimately, she decided to apply to graduate school in medical illustration. And so she was able to bring those passions together in setting her career trajectory. And so I'm really proud of being a part of that narrative of that story. So she designed this logo. She designed our lab logo. That is actually a lion track. And so she took a track from our field research and integrated it into the logo, which was really neat. I'm going to see if this video will work for us. Ooh, that is super loud. Okay, so the video that I'm about to show you, as I was training as a graduate student for my PhD advisor, Rob Dunn at North Carolina State University, we would write a paper, and then he's like, okay, where's your press release? And I'm like, what? Like, I'm not, like, I just did the work. Like, what are you talking about? Now you want me to, like, write a press? Isn't that someone else's job? And so I was really, like, snarky about, like, why do I have to write this press release? But he instilled in me that the science is not done just because the paper is published, right? The science is done when you feel confident that there is some uptake, that there is some use, which means there is a PR dissemination strategy of the science that you should also have a part of your program. And so part of my experience in training and working with him really did transform the way I think about the dissemination part, that it's not just get the paper out. Okay, that's cool, that's necessary, but then what? What happens after that? What is the communication strategy associated with your research program? And so I think very explicitly about that communication strategy of dissemination of the science. And so one way we do that is through videos. We deployed 119 camera stations across the largest protected area complex in West Africa. It's a transboundary national park that spans Burkina Faso, Niger, and Benin. We were really interested in understanding how people and wildlife coexist in places, and national parks are one of the primary conservation strategies that we use worldwide. We know that people are using these protected areas and animals are using those protected areas. Not all human activities create equal. Some things are really bad, some things not so much. We need to know what people are actually doing in those places. One of the primary uses that we documented on the cameras were people moving cattle through the national parks. So buffalo are very similar to cattle. So you can imagine that there can be some competition if you have lots of cattle coming through to graze and drink water, etc. With hundreds of thousands of images that we're getting out of these surveys, requires a small army. So there's undergraduates in the lab as well as graduate students that were involved in the identification and the sorting of those images. You know, a picture's worth 1,000 words. Seeing an image does stimulate additional curiosity.
Seeing just the extent of the human utilization of the park was surprising, and so many different types of activities too. So we saw livestock and herdsmen, we saw people gathering materials, and then there are also poachers.
designing a project that is relevant for the place that you're working, that is culturally sensitive, that is transparent, and that is inclusive, requires a different strategy. I have an amazing built team that we set up. It includes students from some of the local universities, government staff, and government rangers. I have an armed guard with me the entire time. It's a very laborious process, to say the least, but it's a really amazing opportunity and a where we can co-create or co-design and work together so that we ultimately do work that has impact to manage and preserve the wildlife that are there. Cool stuff. Okay, so again, highlighting the point that doing science, great, disseminating, publishing our papers, but then what is the communication strategy afterwards? And so videos is one of the frameworks that we use. There's also been an opportunity, University of Michigan has a new natural history museum, and my research lab was asked to be featured in the museum, and so now we have an exhibit. It may seem like I like pictures of myself, and I promise you I totally don't like pictures of myself, and yet they show up all the time in all these different places. But now there's a museum exhibit at University of Michigan that highlights our research. And so I was told a long time ago when I decided not to have my lab called the Harris Lab that my ego was not big enough to be in the academy, that I need to have this perspective of showcasing myself. And so I've been very deliberate in trying to make sure that my students are always included in videos, that my partners are always involved, that I can't do this work myself, and it is not the Nyeema show. So Tal mentioned that we have a public website, and so the next series of slides that I'm going to show you just have to do with other strategies that I implement in my lab in defining impact. And so part of that has to do with public engagement and broadening participation. And so because of our camera trap surveys that we have in Michigan, we created this website called Michigan Zoom In. And so you guys are all tasked to go to Michigan Zoom In and identify some pictures today. So on the website, literally anyone that has internet access can go to the website and basically play a matching game. A picture shows up from the camera, and then there's a list of choices with subsequent images that you can just play match and identify what's there. And so we've used this now as an education and an outreach tool. So we go into libraries, we go into high schools, we go into other museums, and we showcase our research, but we also ask the public to assist, to be a part of the science that we're doing. On the website, there's a talk board feature, so people can add comments or questions about the images that they're seeing. Again, goes back to this definition of promoting a stimulation and a curiosity of the natural world, right? One of my missions of my lab, all. And so we directly see that as we're engaging with the public and getting them to ask us different kinds of questions. There was a recent question that was posted about a snowshoe hare that was partly changing, and so it was partly white and partly brown, and so they were like, oh my God, the poor rabbit, like, is it diseased? What is happening? And so we got to talk about phenology and climate change with this random person that just wanted to know what was happening with this weird rabbit that seemed sick. Does anyone know what this is? Yay, good job. Okay, so it's a bear cub. It's about 2 days old. This was my first project as an undergraduate at Virginia Tech. And so it was an amazing opportunity for me to get involved in doing science and participating in research as an undergrad to help, again, set this trajectory and define what my research or what my interests or what my career trajectory would be. And so working on this bear project helped, again, solidify, oh, I can do this. Like, okay, no one looks like me, but that's all right. Like, I can still do this because I'm passionate about it and I love it. And so facilitating opportunities for undergraduates to get research experience is a part of one of the other metrics that I use in defining impact for my lab. So I've been at Michigan for now, this is the start of year 5, and I think we have engaged about 26 or 27 undergraduates and research opportunities since I've been there. So I'm very proud of being able to facilitate those opportunities. And those opportunities are field-based experiences. So students going out with us in the field and participating in research and designing their own research projects. So there's a student now in the lab that's doing a senior thesis on vigilance. So she's interested in looking at how vigilant cottontail rabbits are in the city of Detroit and comparing the impacts of coyote, human, and dogs on vigilant behavior. And so she designed her own research project, and she's like super proud of what she's doing. Outside of University of Michigan, another kind of initiative that I have been involved with is co-creating a section as a part of the Ecological Society of America. And so there's a Black ecologist section that allows for those that identify as being Black to have a community, to engage, to partner, to collaborate. And so there's a group of us that organized a symposium at one of the ESA meetings a couple years ago when we were in New Orleans. It was the first all-Black symposium in the history of the professional society. And now we are working on a paper and a proposal together as a part of that initiative. There's also a number of kind of workshops and engagement opportunities that we facilitate throughout the year and at the conference, again, about building community. And so this is another metric that I am using in defining the impact that I want to have and that I am having in the academy. This is a picture that was taken a couple years ago of my lab. And so my first two graduate students at University of Michigan were Corbin and Sean. And there was this expectation that I was going to have a lab that only looked like me. And I was like, wow, is that possible? Like, that seems odd. Okay. I don't want to have an all-anything lab. If I'm saying I value diversity, it means I really do value diversity. I don't want everyone looking the same, thinking the same, or anything. And so something that we think very explicitly about is about our identities. Who the scientist is matters, and it helps to define your impact. And it's not just from a cultural or ethnic perspective. So Corbin's first language is American Sign Language. Both of his parents are deaf. We've thought a lot about what does it mean communicating our science to the deaf community. Other students have been first generation, right? Come from socioeconomic diversity. And so there's different metrics of thinking about what does diversity mean and what does broadening participation mean. The reason why I'm highlighting this is because regardless of what your own identity is, and we can slice it in a whole lot of ways, that identity facilitates opportunities for connections, opportunities to connect with broader communities. And so embracing various aspects of your identity is a part of helping to define your unique contribution and your unique impact that you can have in whatever space and whatever environment you decide to work in. So that's my little pep talk, okay? People have often asked me about my biggest accomplishments, and they want me to say some grant or some job. And the reality is that my biggest accomplishments end up being about people. And I'm not a people person. I didn't become a wildlife biologist because I wanted to talk to people. I thought I was going to be in some distant land observing something on a mountaintop and not seeing folks for days, right? That's what I thought it meant to be a wildlife biologist. So it wasn't about the people. And yet I'm recognizing, as I grow older and become more mature, that people are part of my story, and people are a part of the legacy and the impact that I am going to have as an academician. And so in reflecting on my biggest impact, Asia is one of those. And so for years and years and years, I've been saying that Asia is my biggest accomplishment. She was an undergrad when I was a graduate student at North Carolina State. She was coming from California, was going to be the only Black student enrolled in the department. And so the department head said, Nyeema, you have to be Asia's mentor. We have a mentoring program. Oh, do we now? Now we got a mentoring program. All right, what do I get with this mentoring program? I was like, I need a feeder. Like I want like a monthly stipend of like taking this person that I don't know out to lunch. Can we do that as a part of this mentoring program? He said, yes. I said, okay, let's see what else I can ask for this mentoring program. Point is that in working and engaging and supporting Asia through her experience as an undergraduate student that's underrepresented, that is navigating a space that is unfamiliar and uncomfortable, it was a part of me making a contribution that I didn't know that I could make until having this opportunity to engage and work and support her. She ended up going to Virginia Tech for her master's, which is where I did my undergrad. And now she has a NSF graduate fellowship at Penn State working on her PhD. And so the fact that I was able to support plant a seed in fertile ground and seeing her progress in her career feels good, feels warm and fuzzy. I'm like, oh, I am a little soft. Okay, fair enough. But it's a part of defining my impact. Asia has kind of gotten a boot recently, though, because then there's Gabe. So the story about Gabe is I decided a couple years ago at Michigan to do a summer internship program. So I reached out to colleagues that I know at historically black colleges and said, hey, I want to provide an opportunity for students that are not engaged in ecology and have them come and work in my lab for 7 to 8 weeks, like my own little miniature REU program. Like, what am I thinking? Like, I'm using my startup to do like this miniature REU program. This is crazy. Ended up inviting 3 students out and worked with my lab for the summer, and it was bumpy. Lord have mercy. So they were biology majors, kind of like biology backgrounds, had not done any field experience, no ecology, and so it was unfamiliar territory. And so there were some growing pains that my graduate students and I had to go through because they were just so green. They just hadn't been exposed. And so I wanted to facilitate an opportunity for exposure. Well, Gabe was one of the students that participated in the program, my little program that didn't have a name, this no-name internship that I created for my lab. He ended up graduating from his undergrad, 2 degrees actually, a degree in biology and a degree in education. And then I decided to hire him as a research technician during his gap year. And I said, we can work together, you can get more field experience, I'll help you work on graduate applications if that's the direction that you want to go, but come to the lab for a year during your gap experience and let's see what happens next. And so he ended up coming, being an amazing resource and asset to my lab, and then we worked on graduate school applications, and ultimately he decided to stay at Michigan. And so he's a master's student now in the School for Environment and Sustainability and working on issues around energy justice in Detroit, the use of plants in energy impoverished neighborhoods. And so again, in defining my impact, Asia and now Gabe are a part of that contribution and the legacy that I'm creating. And I'm thankful for being able to have that kind of impact that I wasn't anticipating having, these like people warm and fuzzy kind of contributions. All right, so in closing, as we think about our impact, we recognize that there may be an evolution to that impact. And so the way we're thinking about our own impact as an undergraduate is going to be different than the way we think about it as a graduate student, as a postdoc, as a professor, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing to be thinking about, well, what is my contribution now? What kind of capacity do I have? What type of resources do I have? Okay, that's what I can contribute. That's the way that I can have impact. But it's going to evolve as you're going through your career and navigating different opportunities. My charge is for you to not be complacent, for you not to be complicit in recognizing that there is some dynamism and that the system can change because of you being in it, right? And so thinking about our impact means that we are challenging some systems and we are challenging some infrastructure and we are breaking down barriers, and that is a good thing. So in closing, I'm going to put you guys on the spot again. Can you raise your hand if you've seen the Black Panther? Everyone hand. If you have not, put your head down and go tonight to see it. Does everyone remember Shuri? Can someone tell me who Shuri was in the Black Panther? Do we remember Shuri? She was what? She was the chief scientist. Yes, we like that. So Shuri was the sister that was designing all the cool technology, right? That had him in like special shoes and all the communication devices. She was like the STEM person, right? And so I have kind of leveraged her contribution to think about the Shuri effect. And the environment that I'm working in, the place that I'm working, what is my Shuri effect? How am I transforming or challenging or broadening spaces? And so I think about my Shuri effect from 3 different dimensions. I think about transformation, and part of that transformation has to do with my approach to my scholarship and what species, what place, who am I collaborating with, my approach to doing my scholarship, including the dissemination. Impact that I have is about the exposure and the opportunities that I'm facilitating, whether it's going into a middle school and having them classify images and the kid tell me that I didn't know that there were bears in Michigan. Or if it's Gabe and Asia that I've helped to set a certain path related to ecology and science. And then the last dimension is my own definition of success. And so I can't allow the system, the infrastructure, the university to define what my metrics of success are and the way that I value myself or my contributions. And so that goes back to thinking about the redundancy in the system and the uniqueness of my perspective, of my approach, and of my skill set and my capacity. So all of those have to do with defining my own Shuri effect. And so I'm challenging and encouraging you guys to define your own Shuri effect. And with that, I thank you for your time and attention and welcome any questions, comments, or debates. Yeah.
In one of your earlier slides, you were showing how in places like Singapore and Switzerland, you were talking about a more kind of collaborative approach. What are some lessons from that sort of collaboration maybe that we could think about here?
Yeah, so thinking about collaboration is kind of hard. It means that we have to be better at listening, right? Also better at understanding our own limitations, right? And so part of the research team that you work with is about building the capacity of the science, right? I have my own skill set, but man, it would be super cool if I knew a plant person, right? Or if I knew a molecular ecologist, right? And so recognizing my own limitations and who else I can get around the table to do really cool science. So it means that I have to be listening to the needs of communities or stakeholders. It means that I have to be willing to acknowledge my own limitations and reaching out to people that have an expertise that I don't have in order to do more impactful science. Yeah?
I admire your courage and wisdom in doing this, but how do we actually, like a more timid person like me, how do I do this in the academic environment? If I pursue these true impacts, as long as the institutions don't evaluate those the same, I'm going to fail. I'm going to fall out of the race.
That's a perspective that you're going to fail. Another perspective is that if we continue to perpetuate the same, it means that the same is going to be the only metric and the only value that we have, the only template that we have. I am challenging the system to some extent in saying that I don't represent the same profile, that my value system, my approach is different to my colleagues. And if I am an administrator, if I was a department head, just like all of the literature around diverse teams and different perspectives, it means that if I want an environment that is intellectually stimulating and thriving, it means that I actually need difference. And so what attribute of difference do you bring and that you represent? I recognize what I presented is a bit of an overload. Got like, gee, she seems everywhere. We got like black t-shirts. We got like outreach programs. We got websites. It's a whole lot. And so I recognize that I am a bit ambitious and a bit spastic sometimes. And so I'm not encouraging all of those things that happen simultaneously. But I am encouraging that there is dimensions of that, whether it's from the way you're engaging with hunting communities, whether it's the way that you are teaching and engaging with your class, creating authentic research experiences for undergraduates in your classroom, whatever it is, that there is a dimension of uniqueness, that you are doing something, just one thing that is different, that creates a culture of appreciation for that difference. Because even though not all of my colleagues will admit it, they're like, yeah, I can't do that, but I'm so glad Nyeema's doing that, right? That the value of what those contributions are, it's going to take time, and I totally get it. But we can't change the system if we are only always conforming to it. And so I'm encouraging academicians, those that want to go into academia, to break and expand that box, if you will, that they want us to be in. Yeah?
Do you encourage your grad students to have their own metrics for impact? And so their metrics are yours?
Yeah, so that's awesome. So the question is about just the way I am engaging my graduate students and thinking about their own metrics of impact, and if there's a difference between what my metrics are and what their metrics are. And I would say that no, our metrics aren't different because my metrics continue to broaden, right? So a student that's saying like, I want to engage with the deaf community. I don't know how to engage with the deaf community, but like, can we figure out a word for like trophic cascade? Like that would be awesome. And so now my definition of impacts broadens because of their skill set and their ability and their contribution. And so that part is good. I would say that everyone that comes into my lab, and I've had situations where I am not the right fit for every graduate student. Like that is totally okay. But I make it very explicit when students are interviewing or expressing interest to my lab. Yep, we're going to do cool science. You're going to do cool research. In addition, we are also engaging with the public. We are also broadening participation. You will sign up for an event to a library or elementary school or high school. That is a part of our culture in my lab. That's a part of my value system. So if you don't fit in wanting to do that soft, fluffy, engaging kind of stuff, my lab is not going to be the right fit for you. So there has been tensions around people I was super interested in working with, and they're like, no, I don't want to do that fluffy stuff. I just want to do science. My lab is not the right fit for those individuals, so those individuals do not come. Yeah?
With what you try to do and also pushing these metrics, how do you manage personal boundaries?
I think you're asking something very specific that you're like skirting around.
I guess like time management, or just like if you're sort of doing what might be perceived as extra work,
Yep.
that sort of objectively is.
Yep.
How do you manage that time?
Yeah.
And boundaries?
Yeah, so there's always conversations about like this work-life balance kind of context in the context of academia. I don't really think about it that way. I do the things that I love. So whether it's like I want to go see a Latin on Broadway, or I want to go to the spa, like mind your business. I'm gonna like go to the spa. Like I don't ask you what you're doing. So I make the time that's important for me. I also know that there are sacrifices in the choices that I'm making. My mother recently told me that I was not a good family citizen because I've missed a birthday and a graduation and like somebody got christened or something. And so I wasn't there, right? So there is a cost, right? There's a price that I'm also paying in relationships, whether it's family or personal, et cetera. And so I realize that there are aspects that I am not necessarily doing the greatest in. But I also know that my family is super stressful, and it's actually better for my sanity to go to the field and not go to the christening. So because of that, I'm doing the things that I think are best for me. it also means that, again, there's this evolution, right? I'm going to get older. I may not be able to be in the field as much as things change, and I have to be comfortable recognizing I have to make a different kind of contribution. For example, I'm getting a puppy soon. I'm super excited about this puppy. I can't be in Africa for 4 months if I want to have this puppy. So I'm like, okay, I've been doing this for 5 years, going to Africa, spending 4 months there, but there's this other thing that I really, really want, and I'm not going to put her in like overnight camp for 4 months, right? I'm not doing that, and I can't afford to do that. So I am not going to go to Africa for 4 months once I get the puppy. I'm making a trade-off and saying, I had this awesome experience, this is what I was doing, and it was great then, but there's this other thing that's missing, and I really want to train a puppy. So I can't do that anymore. I'm doing something else. Now I will go for a month or 3 weeks and have to go back. I have to manage it differently because there's something else that I want to do. So that's how I'm navigating. Here's another question. Yeah.
When you're thinking about some of the non-publication-based ways to communicate research, can you talk about how you choose when you think you want to go the more traditional route, and when you decide that you might want to look at a different route, or like how you kind of navigate trying to fill both of those spaces?
What do you mean the traditional route?
Like public journal publications.
Yep.
In terms of communicating your science, like when would you identify as good times to look at an alternative way?
Yeah, so going back to these traditional metrics of the academy, I don't get to not publish papers. I don't get to say like, nope, I don't feel like it. I'm not going to do that. I don't get to do that. However, I will say in the context of like the Michigan Zoom Insight, I was having a little debate recently with a colleague because we were talking about impact and citations, right? And they were like, oh, you know, my paper just came out and there's like 25 citations in the first 2 months or something, whatever the metrics was. And I was like, oh, good for you. So when we launched Michigan Zoom In, there were 1,000 volunteers in 3 days. So just to put that in context, right? Like, so you have your metrics, you have what you're thinking about as impact. There are 4,000 volunteers registered on the website to assist us with identification. Now, because that is not a traditional metric that we're using in the academy, in order for me to expand these bounds, I have to simultaneously know the system and break the system, right? And so I have this website, and there's a paper that we're working on the use of public scientists engaging in our research and the accuracy with expert identifications versus public identifications. So I'm doing this thing that I really love, that I'm really passionate about, and then I've translated it into a metric that other people think about and other people care about in order to navigate that space simultaneously. Yeah.
Dr. Harris, what do you think that you consider a better strategy to find ways to people to collaborate in different fields?
Yeah.
Find like the point where everybody can work together.
Yeah, so collaborating across different fields. I am actually really disappointed at universities in that there isn't more mechanisms and infrastructure built up. Like you have all these amazing people in one place doing all these amazing things, and yet there aren't mechanisms in place to already do that. University of Michigan has set up something over the last couple years. They're calling it M Cubed, where 3 different units, 3 different professors get together because everything is like motivated by money. So you just dangle the carrot of money and then we will come together and play nice. So that program, there's a pot of money to facilitate interdisciplinary research, 3 professors from 3 different units. So the unit isn't just like you're in one department. It's like across humanities, engineering, the medical school, the School of Education, the units. So bringing 3 professors together to work on a collaborative project. They give you seed money to facilitate the research that hopefully you can use as like preliminary data to write bigger grants. And so money ends up being one of those mechanisms that facilitate interdisciplinary research. NSF has a program on coupled human-natural ecosystems. That's another mechanism of money being dangled to make social scientists and natural scientists come together and ask interdisciplinary questions. So money is certainly one framework to facilitate interdisciplinary work. Yeah.
So I appreciate the perspective. I think it's refreshing. But I am curious. So like there's a lot of talk about metrics and metrics that matter to you.
Yep.
But you know, a lot of these things take time. Like you were saying that paper you highlighted where you had all of these varied co-authors, like that takes more time.
Yep.
And you know, there's when you're going up for tenure and promotion,
Yep.
your metrics may not align with the metrics of your tenure committee.
Yep.
And I'm just curious how you sort of translate your priorities and your metrics and your use of time.
Yep.
And how you value that to, say, your tenure committee.
Yep, so I recognize that there is a lot of teaching and training that I have to do with my evaluators. So for instance, if we're putting all this weight on like teaching evaluations and my teaching evaluations suck, I have to say, well, hey, what about these biases that exist around women, people of color, and those that are perceived young? This is a biased infrastructure. Why are we using it, right? So I'm doing a lot of teaching and training through the process. I'm also stating how the importance of my approach represents a novelty. And so do you want to be a progressive department doing things that are cool and kind of cutting edge, or do you want to do things that are a part of the status quo? So I'm challenging them to say like, all right, fine, sure, it's cool, right? Like I have to go through that process. But ultimately, I personally made the decision that my metric of success isn't about the outcome of tenure. If Michigan decides that they do not want to give me tenure, that I have not met whatever expectations, I promise you I will always be employed. I promise you there are other places I can be. I am not selling, I guess, myself short or selling myself or soul to the devil, if you will. It's important for me to navigate and work in a way that's true to myself. And so that's what I've decided to do in every place and every decision that I've made regarding my career. But I absolutely understand that it is viewed as risky, and I am not risk averse.
Can I just follow up?
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, are you communicating those values to your, like, so when you say
You've only known me for 2 seconds. Do you think I'm communicating those values, folks? Okay.
Well, I just mean like, right, are you turning around and saying, yes, I may have gotten fewer papers this year, but look at this metric that, you know, that who I am publishing these papers with? Are you?
Yes, I am doing that, but I am also, there are also, what would I call, advocates or allies or champions that are also a part of my professional space that can also toot that horn for me. Right? It's not just me saying like, oh, I'm so wonderful, I'm so great. It's also other peers recognizing that I am making a contribution, and my contribution is special, important, and unique. And so it's not just my voice that matters in these decisions and in these discussions. That letter writers, peer evaluations, those aspects are also a part of solidifying why this is important. And so it has to be an exterior, or there's a component of exterior evaluation that's a part of helping to justify and defend what I'm doing and why I'm doing it.
Okay, I think we have to cut this.
This was awesome. Thanks so much for being here.